Hey everybody, hope you're doing great today. In this video I want to talk about algae and our aquariums. So algae is a common occurring thing in aquariums, and sometimes algae can get out of control. You have that green water where you can't really see anything in there. You've got that free-floating green algae, and that sucks for a tank. Obviously fish keepers want to see the fish that are in their tank, so if you get one of those green water algae blooms, that's no fun. That's the type of algae, yeah, you do want to get rid of, you do want to control for. Other types of algae, in my opinion, the algae that grows on your rocks, on your decorations, I think looks nice. It adds to the natural look of the tank. And Algae X as a natural filter in that it is soaking up some of the nitrates in your tank that get built up over time through fish waste, through excess food that's uneaten. So by absorbing those nitrates, basically it's keeping your tank in check. Your nitrates are not running out of control, which is going to cause harm to your fish. So the algae has a beneficial use in your aquarium, in my opinion. You've probably seen those pristine tanks where everything has been scrubbed clean and looks great. They look nice from a certain perspective. Yes, everything is clean, but then when you take a look at a tank that's got natural algae growing in the right places and not in the wrong places. So something like, you don't want it on the front of the glass over there, which makes it hard to see. Now, I do admit to letting the algae grow sometimes a little over on the front of the glass, and as long as I can see it, that's fine. And it depends too, if I've got guests coming over, they're gonna be in this room over here, they're gonna see the tank. Yeah, definitely I wanna clean the front glass. And I don't want it overgrowing as well too, because I need to be able to observe the fish, take a look at them. And so cleaning the front of the glass is great. I don't clean the sides of the tank and I don't clean the back of the tank. I do have other means and methods to help get those clean and keep the algae in check in those points. Other places where you don't want algae growing would be like on your living plants. If you got algae growing on top of your plants, the problem you get is the algae is outcompeting the plants, not only for nutrients, but also for the light. So in this case, I've got an overhead light. We've also got light that comes from this back window over here. And if the algae is growing on top of all my plants, then my plants aren't getting enough light and they might die out, or they just won't grow as fast. So with regards to plants, definitely you don't want algae growing on them. You want the plants to be on their own, be able to get their own nutrients, be able to get their own light, so that way they can grow and be healthy, and as well take up those nitrates in your tank and help keep your tank overall healthy for your fish. So as we can see here on my tank, we do have algae growing on these artificial rock background over here. I do have some algae growing on the plants over here, but as you can see, some of the plants have been cleaned off. This Anubias over here has a little more algae growth on it, and some of the rocks over here have had more algae. They've been cleaned off, and I'm going to talk about here in a minute what you can use to help clean off algae in your tank. So when it comes to algae, the best way to control it is to start from the nutrient level. Basically, how much nutrients do you have in that tank? Whether it be coming from fish food, excess fish food that's being uneaten, you're overfeeding your fish, so they're producing a lot of waste. So those types of things can cause the increase in algae growth. Basically, algae is looking for food themselves, things like nitrates and other nutrients in the tank, so they will absorb those nitrates, and that just gives them reason to grow out of control. So by controlling your food, especially if you're overfeeding, I'll hear a lot of recommendations. Oh, you need to feed twice a day, or you need to feed large pinches once a day. In most cases, that's not true. It may be great for the fish food industry that, hey, they buy more fish food, feed your fish more food, that benefits them. But overall, I don't know if that's benefiting your tank. You really need to look at the fish themselves. How are they reacting? Are they moving around? Are they swimming around, having no issues? You got no health issues. They don't look like they're overweight. Then you can cut back on your feedings. You can feed a small amount. In my case, I feed my fish a very tiny pinch of flake food or pellet food. I do rotate their foods periodically throughout the week just to give them a little bit of a variety of food. But overfeeding is a key thing that's going to cause you to have excess nitrates in your tank, and which can cause the algae to get out of control. So by controlling your feeding less, I'll even skip a day or two here during the week. The fish are still fine. They're always going to look hungry. Anytime I come into the room, they're going to be swimming up all over like, hey, feed me, because they know who gives the food. But at the same time too, if you feed them every time they looked at you like, hey, feed me, you're obviously going to be overfeeding them, and you're overfeeding your tank as well too. Another way to control algae is if you've got high nitrates is by doing water changes. So depending on the type of fish you have, like in these cases I have Lake Tanganyika fish in this tank, so I'm unable to do large water changes. They're a little more sensitive to water changes. I do smaller water changes more frequently. Depending on your tank, depending on your fish, you can do larger water changes in order to get those nitrates down. That will help control the algae. But I still would go back to the feed less, and then that will help you control your nitrates as well. Another way to help control nitrates is put live plants in there. The live plants are going to consume those nitrates as well. They're going to compete for the nitrates with the algae. You want them to outcompete the algae. That way your live plants are thriving and the algae is not. So even in this case here, I do have algae. Like I said, I like the algae. I encourage it to grow in certain places. Other places I don't want it to grow. I don't want it growing on plants. But the problem is, unless you're down in your tank on a frequent basis, cleaning off algae off of your leaves or whatnot, you can get pretty labor intensive. So there are other ways to get rid of algae in tanks. There are things like snails. You can get a variety of different snails that enjoy the algae. So in this case, I did buy a couple of Nitrate snails and they're in there. So you can actually see from my earlier video, which I showed the close-up, there's trails in there going where you see algae, you don't see algae. Places where you don't see algae, the snails have come through, they've cleaned it off. And even on the plants, they'll get on the plants, they clean the algae off the plants, they leave the plant alone, and then that benefits the plant's able to get enough light, and that helps that plant grow, versus if it's all covered with algae, that's going to stunt the growth of the plant. Other animals you can put in there are plecos. There's different types of algae eaters like autocats. Plecos are very common. Depending on the size of your tank, you should get a pleco that is perfectly suited for your tank. Some of the common plecos can get very large and would not do very well in a tank like this. Is a 55-gallon tank. So finding a bristlenose pleco who generally stays small, that would work well for this tank. They eat a lot of algae. But you also need to match your fish with your tank mates. You know, if you've got very aggressive fish who are going to fight with each other, fight with other fish, then something like a pleco might not be great because plecos are a little more passive. They're not as aggressive as other fish. So in that case, I might go for something like Nitrate snails. They're generally smaller. They've got their own armor plating with their shell, and they kind of keep to themselves. They do their thing, they clean up the algae, and you don't really even know that they're in there. So there's the different ways you can keep your tank clean. Like I mentioned, snails, plecos, other algae eaters. Controlling your feeding is also important as well, and doing water changes. Depending on which school of thought you are in, some encouraged you don't need to do water changes, just let the tank climb it up correctly and it'll take care of itself, whereas others overstock their tanks. They do need to do water changes on a regular basis because their nitrate levels do spike up quite a bit, in which case algae can help control that. But with algae, you can't really control where it grows, and you can end up having problems with that algae in that it's overgrowing, it's taking over the tank, and you're not enjoying the tank anymore. So that's all I have for this video. Hope it was helpful for you. If you can, please hit that like button, and I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.